And my how many knows what Mulligan stew is? Say that's when you boil everything in the kitchen, even to the dish rag almost. Just put everything in a pot and boil it. That's right. Get everything in there and boil it up. The turnips, the carrots, the potatoes, and the beans and the meal, and just put it together, all together and boil it. Well, almost the Mulligan stew. That will have to last 2 or 3 days. We had on Sunday, had beef in it, so it had to be good. A quarter's worth of beef, my chunk that big. And then Mama would dice it up. Puts me in the mind of Buddy Robinson when he said, one time Uncle Buddy said, I tell you, said, I went out west and they're having a depression out there and said, a great drought was on and nothing to eat. Said, the only thing we had was dried apples. Said, I eat them for breakfast, I drink them in water for dinner, swallow them up in time for supper. So that's about the way that Mulligan still lasted. Just constantly all till about Wednesday it played out. Had to get, then we went back to something else. Great day, oh my. I remember how that back in those days, going to school, I remember brother and I, and the one next to me, is in glory too, and how we went to school together. And we'd go to school, and we were about the poorest kids there was. We'd come across the river from Kentucky, and the Indiana people are just a little more wealthy than they are down in mountain part of Kentucky, anyhow, where I was born at. And I, being the only Kentuckian among them, I sure had a hard way to go. I mean, I did, just as teased me all the time about being a corncracker. And so, and I talk real funny, and I didn't talk plain. Maybe not yet, but I little better job out of it. And so I was kind of tongue tied, like, and I talk funny and they laugh at me, and oh, I had an awful time and rugged, oh my. And I remember there's one thing about my dad, he would, if he owned a grocery bill, he'd go pay that bill. If he had 10 cents left over, he'd drink it. Everything he had, he drank up. And that's the reason today I'm so firmly against drinking. The reason I'm so firmly against that stuff because I knew it ruined my home and spoiled me from a love that I always wanted to be loved, have somebody to love me, and even my people in that way. While I just didn't have it. And we went to school half naked, and what a horrible life we had all because of drink. My daddy was a real man. If he just hadn't have that habit of drinking, and I know that is one of the curses of the nation, and I'm against the thing. You say, will a little beer hurt you? You just get born again and go ahead and drink all the beer you want to. After you get born again, that's right. You can drink just all you want after you get born again, but you get born again first, and that's all you have to do. And then I remember in school one day when I was reading in my history, I was looking there and no one was sitting there. And kid is laughing at me being so rugged, my hair hanging down my neck, and they'd always laugh at me. And I was reading a book where Abraham Lincoln got off of a boat down in New Orleans. And he seen a colored man being auctioned off. And he said, that's wrong. He said, that's wrong. And someday I will hit that. If it takes my life, I will hit it. And he did. And it took his life exactly. And I scolded my geography book, not mine, but one I had borrowed. I didn't have any of my own. I pushed it back and I said, and drinking is wrong. And someday I'll hit it if it takes my life against it, yes, sir. And I say this in regards right now that any person that's really had a touch of Jesus Christ is finished with drinking. That's right. I got my first Bible. People used to say, is it wrong to do this? Wrong to smoke? Wrong to drink? I put a little slogan in the back of my Bible. I picked it up here a few days ago and I was looking at it, a little bitty old Bible. I said, don't ask me foolish questions. Just make this up in your mind. If you love the Lord with all of your heart, you don't smoke, chew, or drink any shine. And that's right, that's still things good, and that's been 20 years ago since I wrote it in there. A man that's born again has no use for that stuff. Now look, what it's hatched out here in America, you can see whether there's any harm to it or not. One time we had the prohibition. Of course, we had gang wars and things, but what did they do? Just like fooling around with an egg, go to fool in the middle of it. and you have the holding everywhere. And I'm not a politician or nothing. It's none of my business what they do. That's their business. Mine's to preach the gospel. But here's one thing, brother, that when just as we went back and put whiskey in all these places, we took the prostitute off of the row and the drunken gambling places and stuck it right in our refrigerators. I seen a picture one time of old John Barleycorn. They called him the whiskey man. He had his hat setting on the back of his head, and if he wasn't a horrible looking scarecrow, they painted him up now and they put him in bumpers, but he's still old John Barleycorn, the same old fellow. That's exactly right. It's like trying to paint a hog up and wash him up and try to make a good different creature out of him. He will go to the wallow just as hard as he can go till you get his nature changed. So the thing that men and women has got to do now is get their nature changed. God changes a man's makeup, changes his nature, makes him a new creature in Christ. I know you believe that. Now, but I never come here to preach though. I tell you my life story. But just to think of how that those days, how that was. I remember sitting in school. I went to school one complete year without a shirt on. I didn't have even a shirt to my name. Mrs. Wathen, a rich woman, she's in glory today, a Catholic woman, yet if, oh, I know she was a Christian. And she gave me a coat, and I wore that coat. I did. I had an old pair of tennis shoes, and my feet the tops of them was out, and my toes stuck up like turtle heads out of a pond. When to my feet sticking up, and that snow coming down, coming to school, and I'd sat there, and this big old coat on. It come spring of the year, and I remember one day, awful warm, and the perspiration just running down my face. I thought, my, it's hot. Mrs. Temple, and she may be setting present for all I know. She doesn't live too far from here. If she is, God bless you, Mother Temple. She's been a lot to my life. All right. What I'm going to say, or I'd call, maybe see if she's here. If you are, I still love you, sister. She said, William. I had my coat collar buttoned up like this. She said, William, aren't you hot with that coat on? The kid is going to say, and it didn't smell so very good. I suppose wearing it all winter. I said, aren't you hot with that coat on? I said, no, ma'am. I'm a little bit cold. Cold. I couldn't take off the coat off. I had no shirt on. So she said, well, son, you must be taking a cold, William. She said, you better come over to the stove. So she built up the fire, set me down there, and I was there, and the perspiration just pouring off of me. And she said, aren't you warm enough to take off that coat yet, William? I said, no, ma'am. Mrs. Tentle, I'm so cold. I couldn't take it off. I didn't have no shirt on. So she said, well, I believe you're sick. I better send you home. And she sent me home thinking that I was taking a cold, but I just didn't have on any shirt. I couldn't take it off. And I went to school with Mama's shoe on one side and Papa on the other one. That's exactly right. A boot gaga, if you know what I'm talking about. Like that. And when that great big boy, just because Satan and sin, and when we were eating, I remember we couldn't eat with the rest of the kiddies. They'd all have sandwiches and light bread. Remember when you used to have an older loaf of bread and you'd get it and save the tags off of it, the back of it for certain things, safety razors and so forth. And I remember when they used to have that, and the women, they most baked their bread. We couldn't do that. We couldn't afford it. And they'd take all the sandwiches and make their little sandwiches, but brother, and I couldn't do that. We had a little half a gallon molasses bucket, about like that. And in there, we had a little jar, and it should be full of greens. And the next one, full of beans. 2 pieces of corn, bread, and 2 spoons would slip off. We was ashamed to eat before the children, who had cakes and cookies and things. And we would go down next to the river and sit out there and set this out on a log and sit there and eat, both of us. I take a piece out of the little jar of beans, and brother would take a bite. And then we'd take a bite out of the greens, not too much. We had to make it, divvy it up between us. And 2 pieces of cornbread, whole cake cornbread that mom had baked for breakfast and had cut little slices like that, just had to go along with the rest of the kids. Oh, I remember one time around Christmas time, I had to get into these things. But around Christmas time, we had a Christmas tree, and the kids down at school would take and cut little white strips of paper and blue ones and green ones and made little chains, you know, how they used to do in school, and we take ours home. So Mama thought she went back out in the field, we did, and cut a little Christmas tree about like that. And Papa went down and he'd get some popcorn that they raised, and they popped the corn and made strings. And Mom strung it up a needle and thread to put around the Christmas tree where we was going to have a Christmas tree. We'd hang up our stockings on Christmas night, and the next morning maybe have orange and three pieces of candy laying out on a little piece of paper laying to one side, maybe little bitty pieces of candy. And we had an orange and a piece of candy and an apple, and what a great fellow Santa Claus was to come bring that to us. How happy we was. My, we'd eat those oranges and the dry and peeling and then eat the peeling. Many times I packed peeling in my pocket for week after week and eat those orange peelings, yeah. We wasted nothing of it. And I remember very well one time when mom had popped some corn, she had another little half a gallon syrup bucket, but she put that full of popcorn. And my brother, that's in glory today, when we took it down, set it in the old cloakroom, country school, I got sitting back there and I thought, oh, what I would. That was a something, what we call a rarity, My, it was something very rare. I thought, wonder if I would just, before dinner time, we get a good handful of that, see, before dinner time come. So I'd figure it all up. So I raised up my hand as a teacher, may be, maybe excused, yes. And so I went out to the cloakroom. I opened up this bucket, reached down in there, and got a great big handful of that corn. Put the bucket back, went around, or the bucket lid rather, went back and stood behind the old chimney back there and ate that popcorn. Oh, it was good. I come back in and wipe my mouth out real good and my hands. And so my brother wouldn't notice it. And so when dinner time came, we went out, picked up our bucket, and we went to eat. After we wanted to eat the popcorn first, because that was better than what we had. So we opened up the bucket, and about a third of it was gone. So my brother looked around. He said, "Say," he said, "something happened to the popcorn." I said, "Sure has, I know what had happened." And friends, not long ago, I came from Houston. I was having a meeting there, and I'd been so tired. I just couldn't pass out. I stayed 8 days and nights without leaving the platform. I said, I'll pray for everybody comes. And I stayed there and praying in the line till I was so unconscious. And they packed me to the car, and I'd lay against the pulpit and sleep a little, and then I'd wake up and pray line still waiting. I don't know where it was out in the street. I just kept on praying for one, the other. Then they'd bring me something that I'd like to eat a little bit, and then maybe pray till I'd get so sleepy. I'd lean against the pulpit like that for hours after hours, and I'd gotten so worn, and they tried to put me in bed. I couldn't go to bed, then I couldn't sleep. I started home, and I never will forget on the road home, I was driving along, and I'd wake up at an old Ford that's been about 5 years ago, and it was backslid, and it was, well, what I mean, it was all right. It was just been treated pretty heavy. And so I didn't have any side in the thing where I beat my leg against it, trying to keep awake, and pulled all the hairs till I don't have hair yet on my back or my hand, trying to keep awake, praying for the sick, trying to keep awake to make my lines go on. I'd found somebody that loved me, somebody who loved me and I loved them, and I was trying to minister my heart out to them. And I remember waking up, and the cars would be blowing, and I'd be asleep over on the other side of the road. And after a while, the funny part of it, I'd woke up, I'd stopped, and I couldn't get to myself. And I had my hands out of the window and was in a cow pasture, and I had my hands out of the window saying, only believe, sister. That's the only thing you have to do, just believe. I said, what's the matter with me? I'd go out, I'd then run off the road out into the cow pasture, I'd sleep on the road, and I'd come home. And oh my, when I got home, and there was, before we kept the people from their house, and there was lined up there 150 or 200 of them sitting before the police, and wife and I prayed for as many as they possibly could. He was coming along towards the daylight, and I heard her. Now, if any of these people may be here today, is she got me to bed, and I was getting quiet, and I'd wake up, and after a while, I would have my arm around my pillow, standing out in the floor, saying, "Now, who's next?" Now, if you'll just believe, Jesus Christ said, if I could get the people to believe, praying with my pillow in my arm, and wife would sit down and cry. She's 32 years old, turned Snow White almost. And if there's any credit goes to the Branham family, give it to my wife. She's the one who deserves it, not me. And standing there, I remember I just got to sleep. I heard a rattling of a noise, and it was an old Chevrolet, drove all the way from up here in Ohio, had come down, a little baby crying, hadn't ceased for days. The doctor didn't know what was the matter with it, and I heard the wife say, "Now, if you'll just sit down." It was long, about, I guess, around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Said, "If you'll just sit down," said, "I'll fix you something to eat." Said, "No, we've had breakfast, Mr. Branham, but only thing that we just thought," said, "Well, we just got him to sleep." Said, "Don't wake him up now, right now." And I was laying in there, and I could just hear that little baby going just like, wheeze and funny noise, crying till he just couldn't cry no more. Do you think I could sleep in that little thing laying in there and think maybe a prayer would help it? I couldn't do it. I staggered out into the room and started crying, went over and sat down, and I said, "Mother, do you believe?" And we have 2 little rooms where we was living. And she laid the baby up there on the table, and I said, "Let's kneel around the table," and started praying. While we were yet praying, the little baby quit crying. About an hour from then, they left. It was cooing and laughing to its mother. Went away. It was a little different. She said, "Before the crowds get gathered in, let me take you somewhere." So we got out in the car and went somewhere. Up to Green's Mill, where I seen the vision and where I was commissioned at. We came back down along the evening. We passed by this old schoolhouse where it used to stand. I stopped there. I remember the old well that I used to drink from, and the kiddies was a little girl, little Rebecca, was picking some violets. She was just about a year old or something, a year and a half, and she was picking some violets out there, playing. And I went and drank from this old well. I thought, as David said, if you could just drink from that well. I went and leaned my arms over around the old wooden fence. I looked across there. I looked up across the field where I used to play. I remember out there how one day, time of my past, 1917, when a big snow came on the ground there. I remember all the boys with sleds out riding. They could ride. Brother and I didn't have no sled. I seen the old hill where we used to coast down. I didn't have no sled. You know what we used for a sled? We went down in an old country dump pile down there and got an old dishpan. And I sat down. We would sit down in that dishpan, put our legs around one another. They'd slit on top of the ground. Many of you remember 1917 snow. And I'd sat down in this dishpan. We'd put our arms around on another. Down the hill we'd go around and around and around the dishpan. We wasn't as much class as the rest of them, but we were riding just the same. So what a difference did it make? We were riding down the hill, this old dishpan, and after a while the bottom come out of it, and eh, I went and got me a log then, and got on the log. I remember coming down just above the hill, where a little old log I chopped with an axe in the front of it, and we'd get down through there. And as a boy, that was the time of the World War One. Everybody wore a uniform that was able to put on one, and a boyfriend of mine named Lloyd Ford, he used to sell these Pathfinders, and used to get him a Boy Scout suit. And oh, how I longed for a Boy Scout suit. And I'd look at him in that Boy Scout suit, he'd wear it to school. And how I liked that. I made an agreement with him. I said, "Lloyd, when you wear that thing out, will you give it to me?" He said, "Sure, I'll give it to you, Billy." I said, "All right." Went On and on it went, and after a while he quit wearing it. And I asked him about it. He said, I'll see what happened to it. But the first thing had been destroyed. The only thing he could find was one legging. So I asked him to bring me that. So he brought it to me. And I remember riding down the hill one day. I wanted to wear that legging so bad. I didn't know what to do. Come down the hill one day, and I had that legging stuffed in my coat. And I hit the bottom of the hill, and I raised up and I said, oh, I hurt my leg. I hadn't know. I said, oh, my leg. I said, it just reminds me, I've got one of my leggings to my boy scout suit. I put that legging on. That was an excuse. Here I was walking along with one legging on, and I went to the blackboard. Do you remember how I used to stand up at the old country schools, the blackboard, When I got up that day, I put this leg, the one that I didn't have the legging. I already had it figured out next to the board, and I put this that had the legging like that. So they couldn't tell I just had on one. I stood sideways like this, working the problem, see if everybody was watching that one legging. All the kiddies got to laughing at me and making fun of me and everything like that, and I started crying. Teacher made me to go home there with my legging going. I always wanted to be a soldier when I got old enough to go in the army. Of course, there was no war then. I remember I was 17 when I signed up in the Navy. My mother taken that out of me when I got home. Then when the next war came, well, they wouldn't have me. But you know what? I finally joined the army. You may not see my uniform, it's on the inside. I joined the Christian ranks of Jesus Christ to be a soldier of the cross. How thankful I am to wear that uniform this afternoon that represents heaven, to join with the rest of you. I was standing there looking at that and thinking about those things as I was leaning across the fence, and I began to think of brother and how I took that handful of popcorn from him. When we used to put our hands on one another's shoulders, stand there, and the flag would go up. The teacher, with that great big pointer, point making us get in line. We'd stand tramping like that and going to school. And I thought, well, look, you know, I used to remember Ralph Field. What happened to him? Yeah, he's gone. And I said, there was Howard Higdon. Yeah, he used to stand by me. What's happened to him? He got blowed up at Colgate. I said that yes, that's right. I remember the old different ones of what had happened to them. I said, now, my brother Edward, that stood right behind me and put his hand on my shoulder, the one I took the popcorn from, I said, what happened to him? Years ago, he died. Calling for me, he said, tell Billy I wasn't a Christian yet. Said, tell Billy that I love him and someday I'll meet him in heaven. I was. I remember when the ranger called out on the prairies and I climbed out of my saddle and he said, is your name Branham? I said, yes, sir. He said, William? I said, yes, sir. He said, I have a message for you. And he handed it over to me. And I read the telegram, your brother Edward died last night. All that began to renew. And I was standing there looking across that fence. I could see that handful of popcorn. Don't ever do nothing wrong. It'll come back to you someday, no matter how little it is. I stood there and tears began to run down my cheek. I thought, God, I'd give the world, I'd give the rest of my mortal life if you let me take that handful of popcorn and walk up to the door. Bam knocks on the pulpit. Say, Edward, buddy, here's that handful of popcorn I cheated you out of that day. How I would give anything if I could have took it to him, but he's gone. I looked up across the field where the old house used to stand up there. Why, there's a housing project. Spring is dry and gone. I used to think of when we used to had an old piece of a mirror that we drove nails around it in a tree, and a little old wash bench. When Dad used to come in there, about 160 pounds, about 5 foot 7 or 8 inches tall, man, oh my, a logger, muscles hanging on him like that, and I'd see him roll them sleeves up with that old blue shirt, old hickory shirt Mom made herself for him, roll it up like that when he would go to wash and the muscles swelling back and forth. I'd stand off, I'd say, that's my dad, that's my dad. He will live 100 years. That's my daddy. When I'm old man, I'll be patting my daddy with the big muscles. See, but he died at 52. Here we have no continuing city, but we seek one to come. I knowed the old house. There was chinked up, and what a great house it was. It's on and gone. A housing project. Where's that big fine bunch of boys? Nearly every one of them is gone. I thought of Roland Holloway, a friend of mine. He used to stand there, little red-headed fellow, enough temper to fight a buzzer, so died in a prison. He shot a man in a crap game. I looked over here to Wilma, thought, what became of Wilma Bates? And I thought, what happened to him? Yes, that's right. What happened to him? He got into a knife fight with a fellow and he cut his throat with a knife. I looked back over here and I thought of Willis Hall. What happened to you, Willis? There I see what happened to him, how he went out in a disease. It stripped his body. I looked down there and seen each one, and I seen them all, and I thought, oh God, here I am left alone. Who am I? Where are they at? The first thing you know, standing there, I was screaming out the top of my voice, oh God, let the angels of God come get this poor, tired bulk. Pack me away from here. This world is not my home any longer. I just come out of that meeting where I was mentally tore up for 8 days and nights, and on nights at the platform, I was shaking and all those things running over. I thought, here we have no continuing city, but we're seeking one to come now. I thought, oh God, wife, come put her arm around me. Said, now look, honey, you come out here to rest. And here you are standing here crying like a baby. Don't do that. I said, sweetheart, if you knew what was traveling through my heart and mind. I remember standing right yonder at that house when little Sharon took sick. She said, now, don't think about that. I got a real wife. And she called me away and picked up the baby and set it around my shoulders. And she went out to the car and drove away. How thinking of things, sometimes you look and say, oh, Brother Branham, I bet you think you don't know what's behind here, brother. You don't know how many times this poor heart has been mashed and crushed and broke and twisted. You don't understand it. That's right. It looks like a flower bed of his, but don't you think that Satan will let that get by like that? Will take a week to stand here and tell you what all these things happened. How I've been right down to the edge of death's door, and then God will spare me. How Satan will set snares everywhere, and he still got them set, going right down to the door, and he will not be able to take me until God is finished with me. Then I want to go when he's finished. When I preach my last sermon, the Bible closed for the last time on the pulpit, my last prayer has been offered up to God. I can't do no more for him. Then I want him to come take me away. That's right. As a boy, I had a very peculiar thing happen as a little lad. I was called one day after school, about 7 years old, by an angel, which told me never to drink or to smoke or defile my body. And I don't mean this to you sisters now, you see, but if there ever was a woman hater, I was one of them. I seen how they come when my daddy ran that boatlog place. And I'd see women come there, young women with somebody else's husband, and the way they would carry on. I said, if that's the way it is, I wouldn't have one of them varmints if they would lure her to me, one of them. That's right. That's true. I thought it. The only respect I had for any woman was my mother. And that's right. And I know she was a lady. I seen her sit on the doorstep with the babies on her arms and cry and cry and cry because she was locked out of the house. When my dad, which was a real man when he was sober, but been drinking, what he would do. And I had a tough life to come up in. I thought, no, I won't have when I was even 17, 18 years old, and I'd passed down the street, and if I seen a girl that I went to school, I thought she was going to speak, not because I just didn't want to have nothing to do with it. Wasn't twisting myself up with them. I went to the other side of the street. I didn't have nothing at all to do with them. At all. So I said, I will. Here was my thought. When I get to be of age, when my mother is well and the boys are all settled down and everything, and I can get enough money somewhere to help take care of my mother, I'm going to Colorado or to Washington State or Canada, and I'm going to be a trapper. I'm going to get me a bunch of dogs. I'm going to get me a bunch of traps. I'm going to get me my rifle, and I'll live there until I die, right in the mountains trapping. My grandfather was a hunter on my mother's side, and I was nurtured after him. And so I said, that's what I'm going to do. I had it in my mind. I said, there isn't going to be any women connected in it at all. So, isn't this funny? How you can change your mind, strange? One day, there was as a boy, there's a little girl come along, and teeth like a pearl, eyes like a dove, neck like a swan, prettiest thing you ever seen. She looked at me, said, "How do you do, Billy?" That was it. Another. She knew another boyfriend of mine. He told me, said, "Oh, she likes you." I said, "Well, I've kind of made a promise. Well, but I was willing to give in. So he said, I tell you, I'll take my girlfriend and you take your girlfriend, and said, and we'll take them on a ride in my dad's old Ford. Said, if I can get the thing started. Said, how much money can you rake up? I said, I don't know. So we raked up enough to get 2 gallons of gasoline. We had about 40 cents between us. He said, now we got to get something soft drinks or ice cream or something. So I said, well, you do the driving of the Ford and I'll do the buying. So I put the 40 cents in my pocket and he was going to drive the Ford, and he got our old Ford and jacked the back of the wheel up. And you know how you used to have to spin them and crank, my, we got her started. And down the road we went and got our girls. Well, I sat in the back seat, and I looked over at her. I thought, maybe they're not all that way. But I was changing my mind. And she'd look over, she said, it's pretty tonight, isn't it? I said, yes, ma'am. So we stopped at a little place just about a square from where I live right now, a little old place called a little old drive-in overfare. And so I said, Jimmy, Paul, and we had it all made up of what we was going to say. And I said, Jimmy, I'm kind of thirsty. And I said, don't you think we ought to stop? And he said, yes. And so we pulled in. So he said, I will go get it. And he didn't even have a dime. And I had his money. I said, never mind, Jimmy, just a minute. I will go get it, you see. So I go in, sandwich for a nickel, great big bologna sandwich for a nickel, and got onion and everything on it. And so we come back out, and I had some cokes, and we was somebody then, we would sit there and drink these cokes, and eat these bologna sandwiches, and the girls and all of us, we talked, and so then I went back to take the cokes back. And it was just about the time the girls began to act smart, begin to come smart Alec, smoking cigarettes. When I come back out, to my surprise, my little queen was smoking a cigarette. Well, I've always had an opinion of a woman who'd smoke a cigarette, and I haven't changed it yet. It's the lowest thing she ever done. That's right, it's just as bad as drinking. Go ahead. I see your face is getting red. But let me tell you something. Let me tell Mama, it'll be good for you. It'll help you. Now, don't get up. I will know, and there the rest of them will know you're guilty. Look, let me tell you, Mama used to tell me when I was a kid, we had to get our grease, we'd have to boil the meat skins in the pan, and we'd have to take a lot of medicine. And every Saturday night, a bath in the old cedar tub and hold our nose and take castor oil every Saturday night. I can't even stand the thoughts of the thing now. And I used to hold my nose and gag. I said, oh, Mama, please don't. Please don't. That big old spoon, that old greasy looking stuff, oh, Mama, please don't. It makes me so sick. She said, if it don't make you sick, it don't do you any good. Maybe this will help you some too. Make you right good and sick, and you'll stop it then. That's right. All right. She said, and I remember here sat my little girl sitting there smoking a cigarette. Oh my. She sure dropped in my estimation then. I sat down and she said, begin to blow smoke like that, phew. And I thought, if the good Lord wanted you to smoke, he put a smokestack on you, see? So I looked over at her like that and I thought, uh-huh. I looked in front. Here was Jim's girl sitting there doing the same thing. Well, Jim smoked himself. So I looked around. She said, will you have a cigarette, Billy? I said, no, ma'am. Thank you. I don't smoke. She said, you don't smoke? I said, no. You just got through telling me that you didn't dance. I said, no, ma'am. Said, that you don't smoke, no? And she said, well, what do you like to do? I said, I like to go fishing. I like to hunt. That didn't interest her. So she said, well, you big sissy. A sissy? My daddy called me that one time because I wouldn't take a drink of whiskey. I wanted to be but there was something wouldn't let me. So I said, "What was that?" And she said, "You're a big sissy." And I said, "Give him the cigarettes."